I never saw it coming. 7 years of marriage, and there I sat across from Troy at our anniversary dinner, watching his lips form the words that would shatter everything. The candlelight caught his wedding band as he told me he wanted out, all while my business account quietly held $500,000 he knew nothing about. For 3 years, I built my company from nothing while he thought I was just keeping house. I planned to surprise him with our financial freedom. Instead, he surprised me first. Troy leaned forward, eyes cold. I need a real wife who contributes, Arabella. Not this. Troy and I met during our junior year of college. He was studying marketing with big ambitions, and I was pursuing graphic design. We connected at a campus coffee shop when we both reached for the last blueberry muffin. He smiled and insisted I take it, then asked for my number. Something about his confidence drew me in. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. After graduation, Troy landed a position at a marketing firm in Portland. He asked me to marry him on a rainy evening beside the river, promising we would build an amazing life together. I said yes, without hesitation, believing in the future he described so vividly. The first few years were good. Troy worked hard, climbing from junior associate to mid-level executive. I found freelance design work that I enjoyed, but as Troy's career advanced, he began suggesting I focus on our home instead. A man needs to come back to a peaceful house, he would say. My boss's wife manages everything so he can focus on work. That's how successful couples do it. I resisted at first, but Troy grew increasingly frustrated with my freelance schedules and deadlines. We don't need your small paychecks, he insisted during one heated argument. My salary covers everything. Why cause tension when there's no financial need? To keep the peace, I gradually took on more household responsibilities and accepted fewer design projects. Troy seemed happier, and I told myself that marriage required compromise. 2 years ago, while organizing Troy's home office, I discovered an opportunity that would change everything. A lifestyle blogger I followed posted about needing custom planner designs. On impulse, I submitted some concepts. Not only did she select my designs, but she also asked if I could produce physical planners for her to sell to her audience. I approached Troy that evening, excited about the potential business opportunity. Absolutely not, he said without looking up from his laptop. Running a business is stressful and time-consuming. You already have a job taking care of our home. Rather than argue, I made a decision that night. I would start the business quietly, working during the hours Troy was at the office. I converted our rarely used guest room into a workspace I could quickly tidy up before he returned home. Using $5,000 from my personal savings, I launched my company. I designed custom planners, journals, and organizational tools, focusing on quality and unique features that mass-market products lacked. I partnered with a small local printer and fulfilled orders myself, working efficiently while Troy was away. As orders increased, I hired Lindsay, a college student, to handle customer service and shipping part-time. She worked remotely, and we communicated primarily through email and messaging apps. Troy never questioned the occasional packages or supplies because he rarely paid attention to household details. The business grew steadily until a popular lifestyle influencer featured my best-selling planner in a video that went viral. Suddenly, orders flooded in faster than I could fulfill them. I expanded manufacturing partnerships while maintaining design control, and profits soared beyond anything I had imagined. By our 7th anniversary, my business was generating over $500,000 in annual revenue. I maintained separate business accounts Troy knew nothing about, planning to surprise him when I reached a major milestone. I imagined his pride when I revealed how I had built something substantial while supporting our home life. Meanwhile, Troy's career had plateaued. His company underwent restructuring, and he was passed over for promotion twice. He began working longer hours and coming home increasingly agitated. Our conversations grew shorter, and he often criticized small household details that never bothered him before. I attributed his behavior to work stress and tried to make home even more comfortable. I prepared his favorite meals, kept the house immaculate, and avoided mentioning my growing success. In retrospect, I was ignoring obvious warning signs. The first real shock came 3 months before our anniversary. Troy came home after midnight smelling of unfamiliar perfume. When I asked about his late night, he snapped that client dinners were part of his job and I wouldn't understand the business world. The next morning, while he showered, his phone lit up with a message. I had never checked Troy's phone before, but something compelled me to look. The text was from Paige, my best friend since college. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." I stared at those words until the screen went dark, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. Paige had been my confidant through every challenge in my marriage. She knew my insecurities, my hopes, and all the intimate details of my relationship with Troy. And now, those 12 words suggested she had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The discovery of Paige's message left me paralyzed. I replaced Troy's phone exactly as I'd found it and went through the motions of our morning routine, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe the message was innocent. Maybe they had a work-related meeting, as Paige's interior design business occasionally collaborated with Troy's marketing firm. But deep down, I knew. The perfume, the late nights, the growing emotional distance. When Troy kissed me goodbye that morning, it felt like a stranger's lips against my cheek. I waited until he left for work, then called my sister Jennifer. "You need to confront him," she said after I explained my suspicions, her voice tight with anger. "I can't just accuse him without proof," I replied. "And what if it's not what I think?" "Then he should have no problem explaining that text," Jennifer countered. That evening, I prepared Troy's favorite dinner and waited. He arrived home 2 hours late, offering a vague excuse about client meetings. As we ate, I gathered my courage. "I saw a message on your phone this morning," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "From Paige." Troy's fork paused halfway to his mouth. A flash of something guilt, anger, crossed his face before he composed himself. "We're working on a potential collaboration," he said smoothly. "Her design skills could be useful for an upcoming campaign. Why are you checking my messages?" "I wasn't. It appeared while your phone was on the counter," I explained. The message seemed personal. Troy's expression hardened. "So you're spying on me now?" "This is exactly the problem, Arabella. You have nothing in your life except this house and me. No career, no real purpose. You're becoming paranoid because you have too much time on your hands." His deflection stung worse than the potential betrayal. "That's unfair. You're the one who wanted me to focus on our home, because I thought you'd find fulfillment in it, not become this desperate housewife checking my phone and imagining things." He pushed his plate away. "Maybe if you contributed something meaningful to our life beyond folding laundry, you wouldn't be inventing drama." I sat stunned as he stormed out of the kitchen. In all our years together, Troy had never spoken to me with such contempt, and he'd never so blatantly lied. The collaboration story might have been plausible if I hadn't known Paige had been out of town at a design conference the previous week, returning only yesterday, the day of their amazing night together. The next morning, Troy acted as though nothing had happened. But something fundamental had shifted between us. I made a decision that day not to reveal my business success. Whatever was happening in our marriage, my company was mine alone, something I had built despite Troy's discouragement. I would protect it while I figured out the truth. I spent the next 2 weeks quietly investigating. I checked our credit card statements and found charges at restaurants I'd never been to, a jewelry store where I'd received no gifts, and a hotel downtown on a day Troy had claimed to work late. Each discovery was another cut to my heart. I considered confronting Paige directly, but hesitated. If I was wrong, I risked damaging our friendship. If I was right, I wasn't sure I could face that confirmation yet. Instead, I followed Troy one evening when he said he was meeting clients. I watched from my car as he entered an upscale restaurant, and 20 minutes later, Paige arrived. Through the window, I could see them sitting close, his hand occasionally covering hers. They weren't discussing business. The intimate gestures, the way they leaned toward each other, it was unmistakable. Still, I needed to hear it from Paige. The next day, I invited her for coffee, something we'd done hundreds of times over the years. "How have you been?" I asked, studying her face for signs of guilt. "We haven't talked much lately." "Swamped with work," she replied, meeting my eyes with practiced ease. "That new commercial property downtown is consuming all my time." "Funny. Troy mentioned you might be collaborating on something," I said casually. A barely perceptible pause. "Oh, we've discussed some possibilities. Nothing concrete yet. He seems to be working late a lot," I continued. "It's been tough on our marriage." Paige reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "All marriages go through phases, Bella. You two will be fine." The sympathy in her eyes made my stomach turn. Here was my oldest friend, the woman who had been my maid of honor, comforting me about the marriage she was actively helping to destroy. I returned home and vomited in the bathroom, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their betrayal. That night, I made 3 decisions. First, I opened a separate personal account and transferred a significant portion of my business earnings into it. Second, I began documenting every inconsistency in Troy's behavior and our finances. And third, I resolved to continue the charade of the oblivious wife while I prepared for whatever came next. Over the following weeks, Troy grew increasingly critical and distant. Small disagreements escalated into one-sided arguments where he questioned my intelligence, my contribution to our relationship, even my appearance. Each attack seemed calculated to diminish me, to justify whatever he was doing with Paige. I maintained my composure, focusing on my business during the day and performing the role of dedicated wife in the evenings. Inside, I was dying by inches. The final blow came when I discovered Troy had begun moving money from our joint savings account into a separate personal account I didn't know existed. Nearly $30,000, most of it from his year-end bonus, had vanished. When I casually mentioned that I wanted to review our finances together, he dismissed the idea. "That's my department," he said. "You've never shown interest in the financial side of things. Why start now?" I smiled and agreed, already planning my next move. The following day, I consulted with attorney Marcus Wells, explaining my situation without revealing my secret business. He advised me to gather as much documentation as possible while protecting my own assets. That evening, while checking social media, I discovered something that stole my breath. A mutual friend had shared photos from a dinner party the previous weekend, an event I hadn't been invited to. In the background of one image, barely noticeable unless you were looking, were Troy and Paige, his arm draped possessively around her waist. I zoomed in on their expressions, the intimate familiarity evident even in that casual moment. This wasn't a recent development or a momentary lapse. This was an established relationship being conducted right under my nose, with the knowledge of our social circle. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark living room until Troy came home near midnight. He didn't explain where he'd been. He didn't have to. The truth was written all over him. I lay awake beside him that night, listening to the steady breathing of the stranger who was my husband, and wondered how long he would continue the charade. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 1 week later, Troy suggested we have dinner at Riverside Grill, the restaurant where he had proposed. A small, hopeful part of me wondered if he had recognized the damage to our marriage and wanted to make amends. The practical side of me knew better, but I agreed anyway. I dressed carefully that evening, choosing a burgundy dress Troy had once complimented. My reflection showed a woman I barely recognized, thinner, with shadows under her eyes despite careful makeup. 7 years of marriage had led to this moment, and I sensed whatever happened tonight would change everything. Troy was unusually attentive during dinner, asking about my day and reminiscing about our early relationship. For a moment, it felt like being with the man I had fallen in love with. But there was something rehearsed in his questions, something calculating in his smile that kept me on guard. After our entrees were cleared, Troy reached across the table for my hand. "Arabella, we need to talk about our future." "I agree," I said, my heart pounding. He took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about where we're headed. The truth is, I feel like we've grown in different directions." "Different directions," I repeated, the words hollow. "Yes, I've changed. My ambitions, my needs, they're different now." "And what are your needs now, Troy?" I asked quietly. He withdrew his hand, his expression hardening slightly. "I need a partner who challenges me, who has their own career and ambitions, someone who understands the business world I operate in." The irony was almost unbearable. I had built a successful company right under his nose, precisely the accomplishment he was now claiming to want in a partner. I managed. "And I don't challenge you? You've chosen to be a housewife, Arabella. That was your decision, and I respected it. But I've realized I need more from a relationship." My decision? As if he hadn't systematically discouraged every professional opportunity I'd considered. "So what are you saying exactly?" I asked, though I already knew. Troy straightened his shoulders, as if preparing to deliver a practiced speech. "I think we should end our marriage. I want a divorce." Despite expecting these words, hearing them spoken aloud sent a physical shock through my body. 7 years together, dismissed in one sentence. "This feels very sudden," I said carefully. "It isn't sudden for me," he replied. "I've been unhappy for a long time. And you never thought to discuss this unhappiness with me? To give our marriage a chance?" Troy's expression flickered with momentary guilt before hardening again. "What would be the point? We want fundamentally different things. You're content being financially dependent on me, staying in the same routine. I want growth, challenges, someone who contributes equally." Each word was like a slap. I took a sip of water, buying time to steady my voice. "And there's no possibility of working through this?" "I've made my decision, Arabella. I've already spoken with a lawyer. We can make this simple if you cooperate." The calculated nature of it all, consulting a lawyer before even discussing our problems, confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't about my lack of career or ambition. This was about creating a narrative that justified his betrayal. "What does simple look like in your mind?" I asked. "We sell the house and split the proceeds. You keep your car and personal belongings. I'll provide temporary support while you get on your feet. 6 months should be sufficient to find employment with your design background." His generosity was breathtaking. 6 months support after 7 years of marriage, during which he had actively discouraged my career. And if I contest this? The question was purely exploratory. I had no intention of fighting for a marriage built on such deception. Troy's expression darkened. "That would be unfortunate and unnecessary. My lawyer believes my position is very strong. Dragging this out would only deplete the assets we could otherwise divide amicably." I nodded slowly, allowing him to interpret my response as submission rather than calculation. "I'll need time to process this." "Of course," he said, his tone softening with apparent relief at my compliance. "Take whatever time you need, but the sooner we begin proceedings, the sooner we can both move forward." Move forward. As if our marriage had been merely a business arrangement that was no longer profitable. I asked the question I needed answered, though I already suspected the truth. "Is there someone else, Troy?" He hesitated, confirming my suspicion before he even spoke. "That's not what this is about." "But is there?" I pressed. Troy looked away, then back at me with a practiced expression of regret. "I have met someone who understands me better. But that happened after I realized our marriage wasn't working. It's not the cause." The audacity of his lie was stunning. I had evidence of his relationship with Paige going back months, possibly longer. "Does this person have a name?" I asked, wondering if he would actually admit to betraying me with my best friend. "That's not relevant to our discussion," he replied coldly. "What matters is that we handle our divorce with dignity." Dignity. After he had lied, cheated, and manipulated. "I understand," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I'll consult with an attorney to review whatever your lawyer prepares." Troy seemed surprised by my composure, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. "That's mature of you, Arabella." I managed a smile that didn't reach my eyes. One of us should be. The remainder of dinner passed in strained small talk. Troy insisted on paying the bill, his final act as a husband, and we drove home in separate cars. As I followed his taillights through the darkening streets, I felt a strange sense of clarity emerging through the pain. My marriage was over, but the life Troy believed I had, the financially dependent, professionally stagnant housewife, had never been my reality. He had constructed a convenient narrative to justify his betrayal, never suspecting that while he was sneaking around with my best friend, I was building a future he knew nothing about. That night, as Troy slept in the guest room, I made my first call to attorney Marcus Wells, arranging a formal consultation for the following day. The second call was to Jennifer, who offered her immediate and unconditional support. "He's going to regret this," she said fiercely. "Yes," I agreed, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "I believe he will." The weeks following Troy's divorce announcement passed in a blur of legal consultations and emotional processing. I moved into our spare bedroom, while Troy continued occupying the guest room, our paths rarely crossing in the house we once shared as a loving couple. When we did interact, Troy maintained a detached politeness that infuriated me more than outright hostility would have. During this limbo period, I threw myself into my business with renewed intensity. The company that had once been my secret joy now became my sanctuary. I expanded my product line, hired 2 additional remote employees, and negotiated with larger distribution partners. Every success felt like a private victory, proof that Troy's dismissive assessment of my potential was profoundly wrong. "Your business financials look exceptional," Marcus Wells commented during one of our strategy meetings. "Are you certain Mr. Adams has no knowledge of this company?" "Completely certain," I confirmed. "Troy believes I've been a housewife for the past 5 years. He has no idea I've been running a successful business from our home." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "And you've maintained separate business accounts all along?" "Yes. I opened them when I started the company. Troy has never had access." "That's fortunate," Marcus said. "It simplifies our position considerably. Since he's unaware of your business, and you've kept the finances entirely separate from marital assets, we can make a strong case that the company and its profits remain exclusively yours." This conversation solidified my resolve to continue concealing my financial success until the optimal moment. Troy had presented me with divorce papers that reflected his perception of our situation: a successful executive husband generously providing for his unemployed wife. The terms included a modest settlement that assumed I had contributed nothing of financial value to our marriage. Marcus advised me to appear hesitant, but ultimately compliant. "Let him believe you're intimidated. The less he suspects about your actual financial situation, the better." While navigating these legal waters, I discovered something that stopped me cold. Troy had been manipulating our joint finances for months, gradually moving assets to accounts in his name only. The $30,000 I'd noticed missing was just the beginning. He had systematically diverted nearly 70% of our shared savings money we had both contributed to during our marriage. When I brought this information to Marcus, he wasn't surprised. Unfortunately, this is common behavior when someone is planning to leave a marriage. The good news is that these transfers create a clear paper trail. We'll use this to demonstrate his intent to deprive you of marital assets. I followed Marcus's guidance, documenting everything while maintaining the appearance of a wife blindsided by divorce. Troy seemed to relish his perceived advantage, occasionally making comments about how I would need to adjust to a simpler lifestyle once our divorce was finalized. If only he knew. During this time, I had almost no contact with Paige. She had stopped reaching out after our coffee meeting, and I made no effort to connect. The few mutual friends who knew about the situation were divided in their loyalties, some offering support, while others maintained uncomfortable neutrality. I learned through these connections that Paige and Troy were increasingly public about their relationship, though they maintained the fiction that it had begun after our separation. Then came the day that shifted everything. I was organizing files in my home office when I received a notification from an industry newsletter. The featured article highlighted innovative planners disrupting the market, and there was Paige, smiling confidently beside product mock-ups that looked disturbingly familiar. My hands trembled as I read the article. Paige was launching a planning system with features remarkably similar to my best-selling products. The article quoted her describing concepts I had developed and refined over years presented as her original ideas. "I've always been passionate about organization and design," she claimed in the interview. "These planners represent a fresh approach to personal productivity." Fresh. As if she hadn't spent hours in my home office, admiring prototypes and asking detailed questions about my design process. I immediately forwarded the article to Marcus with a brief message. "We may have a problem." His response came within the hour. "This appears to be more than coincidence. Have you protected your intellectual property?" The question hit me like a bucket of cold water. I had copyrighted my designs and registered my company, but I hadn't pursued patents for some of the unique organizational systems I'd developed. It had seemed unnecessary in a market built on trust and originality. That afternoon, I initiated emergency consultations with an intellectual property attorney recommended by Marcus. We began the process of formally protecting my innovations while gathering evidence of Paige's knowledge of my business. As these legal wheels turned, I received a text from our mutual friend Stephanie. "Have you seen Paige's Instagram?" "I'm so sorry, Arabella. I hadn't checked Paige's social media since discovering her betrayal, but Stephanie's message propelled me to look." There, displayed for all to see, was a series of photos featuring Paige and Troy at dinner, at a concert, hiking, documenting a relationship they claimed had only recently begun. The caption under the most recent image read, "When you find someone who truly sees you, everything changes." Sees you. As if Troy had somehow recognized something in Paige that he had missed in me. The cruel irony was that Troy had never truly seen me at all, had never bothered to recognize my capabilities or support my ambitions. What was more disturbing was discovering older posts where Paige had subtly referenced business insights that I now recognized as information I had shared confidentially. She had been mining our friendship for professional advantage long before her affair with Troy became physical. I confronted Paige that evening, calling her directly instead of hiding behind texts or emails. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. "Arabella, this is unexpected." "I imagine it is," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I've just been looking at your new planner line. Impressive how quickly you developed those concepts." A pause. "If this is about Troy, this isn't about Troy. It's about you stealing my business ideas." Another, longer pause. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a fact, Paige. Those organizational systems, the color, coding method, the goal, tracking template, they're all concepts I developed and shared with you as my friend. You never marketed them commercially," she countered, her voice hardening. "Ideas aren't protected unless they're implemented." Her casual dismissal of ethics stunned me. "So that makes it acceptable to steal them? To use everything I shared with you in confidence?" "Business is business, Arabella. If you had your act together professionally, you might understand that." The conversation devolved from there. Paige alternated between defensive justifications and cruel jabs at my domestic lifestyle. When I pressed her about Troy, she finally abandoned all pretense. "Troy was never satisfied with you," she said coldly. "He needed someone who understood ambition, who could be a true partner in every sense. You chose to be a housewife, and you chose to betray your best friend." "I chose happiness," she fired back, "something you never had the courage to pursue. You settled for comfort and security while Troy's career advanced. He outgrew you, Arabella. It happens." After ending that call, I sat in my office, surrounded by the evidence of my success. Success neither Troy nor Paige knew existed, and felt an unexpected calm replace my anger. They truly believed I was the person Troy had reduced me to, a dependent, unambitious housewife without the courage to pursue my dreams. Their perception was so fundamentally wrong that it had become almost laughable. While they constructed their relationship on a foundation of betrayal and stolen ideas, I had built something authentic and valuable they knew nothing about. That night, I made another decision. Instead of exposing my business success immediately, I would wait. There would be a moment when the revelation would have maximum impact, when Troy and Paige would fully understand exactly what they had thrown away and attempted to steal. Patience had built my business. Patience would deliver the perfect resolution to this painful chapter of my life. As the divorce proceedings advanced, I developed a strategy that Marcus described as brilliantly understated. Rather than fighting Troy on every point, I appeared to concede to most of his demands while quietly protecting what mattered most. "The temporary support he's offering is insultingly low," Marcus observed during one meeting. "We could easily argue for more." "Let him think he's winning," I replied. "The financial outcome isn't what concerns me." Marcus studied me thoughtfully. "You're taking the long view. I respect that." The long view included formally incorporating my business under a new name, securing patents for my unique planning systems, and documenting every instance where Paige had accessed information about my company. I hired a specialized intellectual property firm to establish clear ownership of my designs and methods. Meanwhile, Troy became increasingly emboldened by what he perceived as my passive acceptance of his terms. He requested additional assets, artwork we had collected together, furniture with sentimental value, even jewelry he had given me as gifts. With each demand, I appeared reluctantly compliant while documenting his growing greed. "Do you need the crystal vase from our wedding?" I asked when he added it to his list. "It was a gift from my grandmother." "It's worth money," he said dismissively. "You can have the photo albums instead." His casual cruelty was almost comical now. The man who once promised to cherish me forever was haggling over household items like a flea market vendor. During this period, Troy began staying at Paige's apartment more frequently, returning to the house only to collect additional belongings or pressure me about divorce terms. During one such visit, I overheard him on the phone discussing business plans. "The concept is already market-tested," he was saying. "We just need capital for the initial production run and marketing push. The return on investment will be substantial." I paused outside the door, listening as Troy pitched what was unmistakably a version of my business model to a potential investor. He described features identical to my products, but presented them as revolutionary innovations that he and Paige had developed. "My partner has the design expertise, and I bring the marketing background. It's the perfect combination." Later that week, through careful questioning of mutual acquaintances, I learned that Troy had convinced Paige to invest most of her savings in their venture. They planned to launch immediately after our divorce was finalized, positioning themselves as competitors in my market space without realizing they were targeting my established customer base. The audacity was breathtaking. Not content with betraying me personally, they intended to build their future on the theft of my professional work as well. Rather than confronting them directly, I accelerated my protection strategy. I secured exclusive contracts with my key manufacturers, registered additional trademarks, and documented every similarity between my established products and their proposed line. My intellectual property attorneys prepared cease and desist letters that would be delivered at the appropriate time. As these business maneuvers proceeded behind the scenes, Troy pushed for a quick resolution to our divorce. "There's no reason to drag this out," he insisted during a tense conversation in our kitchen. "You've agreed to the terms. Let's just sign the papers and move forward." "Move forward to what, Troy?" I asked, genuinely curious about how he justified his actions to himself. He hesitated, perhaps hearing the genuine question beneath my calm tone. "To whatever comes next for both of us. We tried, Arabella. It didn't work. That's life. And Paige? Is she what comes next for you?" Troy had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's complicated. It seems very simple from where I'm standing," I replied. "You and my best friend betrayed me together. Now you're planning a future together. What's complicated about that?" "You don't understand the connection we have," he said defensively. "Paige and I share ambitions, goals. We challenge each other professionally." I nearly laughed at the irony, but maintained my composed expression. "I'm happy you found someone who meets your needs, Troy. I truly am." He studied my face, seemingly unsettled by my lack of anger. "This is for the best, you know. Eventually you'll see that." "I already do," I said, with more honesty than he could possibly understand. 2 days later, I signed the divorce papers. Troy had been surprised by my attorney's few strategic modifications, but ultimately accepted them as minor concessions to move the process along. The agreement allowed Troy to believe he had secured the majority of our joint assets while protecting my separate business interests and establishing grounds for future legal action regarding his financial manipulations. As expected, Troy immediately accelerated his plans with Paige. Through industry connections, I learned they had secured modest funding for their business venture and leased small office space downtown. They began recruiting staff and approaching manufacturers, some of whom were already under exclusive contract with my company, a fact they would discover too late. I maintained my low profile, operating my business as usual, while preparing for the significant expansion that would coincide with Troy's discovery of my success. I purchased a beautiful home in a neighborhood across town, one much nicer than the house we were selling as part of our divorce settlement. I arranged to close on the property the same day our divorce became final, a private milestone only Jennifer and Marcus knew about. The final piece of my response came together when Troy and Paige sent a joint email to our social circle announcing their engagement, just 6 weeks after my separation from Troy became public knowledge. The message included a thinly veiled narrative, suggesting their relationship had blossomed naturally after Troy and I had grown apart. Several friends forwarded the announcement to me with messages of support and outrage. I thanked them for their loyalty but requested they maintain cordial relationships with Troy and Paige. "This will all work out exactly as it should," I assured one particularly indignant friend. "Some things just take time." The day before our divorce was to be finalized, Troy called to confirm I would attend the court hearing. "Of course," I said. "I wouldn't miss it." "Good," he replied, sounding relieved. "And afterward, we should discuss the sale of the house. I have a buyer interested if you're willing to move quickly." "I've already made arrangements to move out," I told him truthfully. "The house can be sold as soon as legally possible." "Perfect. I appreciate your cooperation, Arabella. This could have been much more difficult." I smiled to myself, thinking of all he didn't know. Yes, it certainly could have. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. The next morning would bring the official end of my marriage, but it would also mark the beginning of something else, the moment when the careful strategy I had developed would begin to unfold. The divorce was granted without drama, Troy appearing confident and eager to begin his new life, unaware that the foundation of that life was built on quicksand. As we left the courthouse, he offered a perfunctory handshake. "I hope you find happiness, Arabella." "I already have," I replied, my smile genuine. "Best of luck with your new business venture." He looked startled. "You know about that?" "Portland is a small city, Troy. Word gets around." Before he could respond, I walked to my car, leaving him staring after me with the first flicker of uncertainty I had seen since this ordeal began. The next day, as I settled into my new home, I received confirmation that Troy and Page had launched the website for their business. The products displayed were unmistakable imitations of my designs, with only cosmetic differences to disguise the theft. Within hours, their site received a formal cease and desist letter from my attorneys, the first public indication that they had severely miscalculated. The stage was now set for the final act of a drama Troy had initiated but could no longer control. 2 months after our divorce was finalized, Troy and Paige married in an elaborate ceremony at Riverside Gardens. I wasn't invited, of course, but several mutual friends attended and shared details afterward. The wedding was ostentatious, clearly designed to announce their success and happiness to our social circle. Paige wore this ridiculously expensive designer gown, my friend Stephanie reported over coffee the following week. And Troy kept making toasts about new beginnings and finding his true partner. It was honestly nauseating. I smiled, sipping my latte. I'm sure it was beautiful. You're taking this so well, Stephanie marveled. I'd be plotting revenge. Living well is the best revenge, I replied. And I am living very well. Indeed, the months following my divorce had been transformative. Without the weight of Troy's criticism and the energy spent maintaining my secret, I channeled everything into growing my business. I leased proper office space, hired additional staff, and initiated partnerships that expanded my market reach significantly. The company that had generated $500,000 the previous year was now on track to double that figure. More importantly, I had reclaimed my sense of self. The woman Troy had tried to diminish, the supposedly unambitious housewife without direction, had never been real. The authentic Arabella was a successful entrepreneur with clear vision and growing influence in her industry. Meanwhile, Troy and Paige's business venture struggled from the start. The cease and desist letter from my attorneys had forced them to redesign their products, delaying their launch by weeks. Without the copied elements that made my planners unique, their offerings were generic and unremarkable. Early sales were disappointing, creating tension in their new partnership. I monitored these developments dispassionately, neither intervening nor gloating. Their struggles were the natural consequence of building a business on stolen ideas rather than authentic innovation. The real turning point came 6 months after our divorce, when I received an unexpected email from Abigail Chen, the CEO of Integrated Lifestyle Brands, one of the largest distributors in the personal organization market. She had discovered my products through an industry showcase and was interested in a potential acquisition or distribution partnership. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. After several meetings and careful negotiation, we signed an agreement that would place my planners in major retail chains nationwide while preserving my creative control. The deal included a substantial upfront payment and ongoing royalties that would transform my already successful business into a major market player. The announcement of this partnership made headlines in industry publications and local business news. I gave a brief interview to the Portland Business Journal, describing my company's journey without mentioning the personal circumstances that had shaped it. The article included a professional photo of me in my new offices, surrounded by my expanding team. 3 days after the article was published, Troy texted me for the first time since our divorce. "Congratulations on your business success. We should catch up sometime." I didn't respond. The acknowledgement I had once craved from him now meant nothing. His approval or attention were currencies I no longer valued. A week later, I received a more formal message, an email requesting a meeting to discuss some unresolved matters from our divorce settlement. I forwarded it to Marcus, who advised caution. "He may be fishing for information about your financial situation," Marcus suggested. "Given the timing, it's suspicious." "Or he may have realized that his new business venture can't compete with mine," I replied. "Either way, any meeting should happen on your terms, In your territory. I agreed, and responded to Troy with a brief, professional message suggesting he visit my office if he had matters to discuss. I proposed a date 2 weeks out, indicating my busy schedule, and specified a 30-minute window. The subtle message was clear. I would hear him out as a courtesy, nothing more. His acceptance came within minutes, suggesting an urgency that contradicted his casual tone. During the intervening weeks, I learned through industry channels that Troy and Page's company was struggling significantly. Their initial investors were becoming nervous about disappointing sales figures, and they had been forced to discount their products to generate cash flow. Their marriage was reportedly showing strain as well, with public disagreements at business events and social gatherings. None of this brought me joy. The pain they had caused was real, but I had moved beyond wanting them to suffer. What I wanted, what I had created for myself, was a life defined by my own success, rather than their failure. When the day of our meeting arrived, I arranged for my executive assistant Marissa to greet Troy in our reception area and escort him to my office at precisely the scheduled time. I would allow him no opportunity to arrive early and catch me unprepared. At 3 o'clock, Marissa knocked on my office door. "Mr. Adams is here to see you, Miss Miller." I had reclaimed my maiden name after the divorce, another step in reestablishing my independent identity. "Thank you, Marissa. Please show him in." Troy entered my office with the confident stride I remembered, but something in his expression shifted as he took in the space, the floor, two ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland, the tasteful artwork, the clearly expensive furnishings. This was not the office of someone struggling after divorce. "Arabella," he said, his voice warm, as if greeting an old friend. "You look amazing." I remained seated behind my desk, offering a professional smile rather than the personal connection he seemed to be attempting. "Thank you, Troy. Please, have a seat. How can I help you today?" He settled into the chair across from me, visibly adjusting his approach. "This is quite an operation you've built. The article didn't do it justice." "Thank you. We've grown quickly this year." "Clearly." His eyes scanned the office again. "How long has this been in the works? The article mentioned you founded the company 3 years ago, but that can't be right." "It is, actually. I started the business while we were still married." Troy's expression froze. "While we were married? But you never mentioned." "You never asked," I replied simply. "You assumed I spent my days keeping house, and I chose not to correct that assumption." He stared at me, recalibrating everything he had believed about our marriage. "So, all that time, when I thought you were, I was building this company, designing products, fulfilling orders, hiring staff, generating revenue. From our home? Initially, yes. Later, I used remote staff and manufacturing partners." Troy leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Why keep it secret? Were you planning to leave all along?" The question was so ironic I almost laughed. "No, Troy. I was planning to surprise you with our financial success. I thought you'd be proud." He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I would have been. "I always said I wanted a partner with ambition." "No, you said that after the fact to justify your affair with Paige. What you actually said, repeatedly, was that you wanted me to focus on our home while you handled the career side of our life." Troy shifted in his seat, defensive now. "That's not entirely." "It's exactly what happened," I interrupted. "But we're not here to revisit our marriage. You requested this meeting to discuss unresolved matters. What specifically did you want to address?" Troy cleared his throat, redirecting. "Right. Well, given this new information about your business, I believe there may be grounds to revisit our divorce settlement." I had anticipated this. "On what basis?" "You clearly had substantial assets that weren't disclosed during our proceedings. That constitutes..." "I disclosed everything legally required," I cut in. "The business was established with my personal savings, maintained with separate accounts, and never commingled with marital assets. Marcus Wells has extensive documentation confirming this." Troy's expression hardened. You deliberately concealed. I maintained privacy about a separate business that you had explicitly discouraged me from starting, I corrected. A business that became successful despite your lack of support. There's no legal obligation to disclose specific career activities when they don't impact shared finances. He stared at me, realizing his position was weaker than he had thought. So you planned this. You let me believe you had nothing while you were actually building something substantial? Yes. Just as you let me believe you were committed to our marriage while you were actually having an affair with my best friend and planning to leave. The direct confrontation silenced him momentarily. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from accusatory to almost pleading. Arabella, we had 7 years together. Doesn't that count for something? If I had known about your business, things might have been different between us. I studied him, recognizing the calculation behind his apparent remorse. Troy wasn't sorry for betraying me. He was sorry for underestimating me. He wasn't seeking reconciliation. He was seeking advantage. Our marriage ended because of choices you made, Troy, not because of information you lacked. But that's the past. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss today? He hesitated, then tried another approach. Actually, I wanted to explore the possibility of a business collaboration. Given your recent success and our complementary skill sets, that won't be possible, I said firmly. Our companies have fundamentally different approaches to the market. And frankly, your current business model appears to be failing. Troy's expression hardened. That's unnecessarily harsh. We're experiencing temporary challenges. You're experiencing the consequences of launching products based on stolen concepts without understanding what makes them valuable, I corrected. And I suspect your investors are beginning to realize that. Before Troy could respond, my office door opened abruptly. Paige stood in the doorway, her expression a mixture of anger and shock as she took in the scene Troy sitting across from me in my impressive office. I knew it, she said, her voice tight. When you insisted on meeting Arabella alone, I knew something was happening. Troy stood quickly. Paige, this isn't what it looks like. I'm here strictly for business reasons. Paige ignored him, her attention fixed on me. Nice office, Bella. Quite an upgrade from playing housewife. Thank you, I replied calmly. Though I was never actually playing housewife, I was building a multi-million-dollar company while you were stealing my personal and professional trust. Her eyes widened at my direct acknowledgement of what had happened. You have no idea what was really going on in your marriage, she countered. Troy was miserable for years before you betrayed our friendship? I finished for her. I'm aware of the timeline, Paige. More aware than you might think. Troy stepped between us. This isn't productive for anyone. Paige, we should go. She turned on him. You said you were meeting with potential investors today. Instead, you're here with her. In this palace of an office we never knew existed. I just found out about it too, Troy admitted, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Arabella's business, the one competing with ours, she started it while we were still married. Paige stared at me, the implications sinking in. You've been running a planning company all this time? The concepts you shared with me as a friend were from my professional work. Yes, I confirmed. Work I developed and commercialized long before you decided to copy it. The color drained from her face. That's why our products aren't performing. You already had market presence we knew nothing about. Among other reasons, I agreed. Troy checked his watch with obvious discomfort. We should really go. We have that meeting with the bank at 4. The mention of the bank meeting caused a visible reaction from Paige. Financial pressure was clearly mounting for their struggling venture. As they prepared to leave, I remained seated, maintaining the composure that had carried me through the entire ordeal. Troy, Paige, I truly wish you both well. But I think it's best if we maintain strictly professional distance going forward. They departed without further argument, Troy's confident stride replaced by tense shoulders. Paige following with repeated glances back at the office she had never known existed. After they left, I sat quietly, processing the encounter. There was no satisfaction in their obvious distress, only a sense of closure. The life they had tried to diminish had flourished beyond anything they had imagined. The woman they had underestimated had surpassed them both professionally and personally. The secret I had kept to surprise my husband had instead become the foundation of my independent success. Sometimes, life's most painful detours lead to the destinations we most need to find. 1 year after my divorce from Troy became final, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Portland Convention Center, accepting the Regional Entrepreneur of the Year award. The audience of 500 business leaders and innovators applauded as I spoke about perseverance, adaptation, and authentic creativity. Success isn't just about financial metrics, I concluded. It's about building something that genuinely improves people's lives while staying true to your own values. Thank you for this recognition of our team's commitment to that principle. As I returned to my table, where Jennifer and my executive team waited with champagne, I reflected on how dramatically my life had transformed. The company that had begun in my guest bedroom now occupied 2 floors of a downtown office building, employed 37 people, and had expanded into international markets. The acquisition offer from Integrated Lifestyle Brands had been just the beginning of our growth trajectory. More importantly, I had reclaimed my identity. The woman standing in that spotlight wasn't defined by her failed marriage or past betrayals. She was recognized for her creativity, business acumen, and leadership qualities that had always been present but had flourished when given room to grow. After the ceremony, as we celebrated at an upscale restaurant overlooking the river, Jennifer raised her glass. To my amazing sister, who turned lemons into an entire lemonade empire. We laughed and clinked glasses, the joy of the moment unmarred by thoughts of Troy or Paige. They had become increasingly distant figures in my consciousness, relevant only as steps on a journey that had led me here. The following Monday, returning to the office energized by the award recognition, I found an unexpected message from my receptionist. Troy Adams called while you were in the ceremony. He asked if you could spare 15 minutes to discuss an urgent matter. I hesitated, then made a decision. If he calls again, you can schedule him for Friday afternoon. 15 minutes only. Whatever Troy wanted, I no longer feared the encounter. The power dynamic had shifted irreversibly, and any lingering emotional attachment had dissipated in the light of my new reality. Friday arrived, and precisely at 3 o'clock, Troy was shown into my office. The difference in his appearance from our last meeting was striking. The confident executive had been replaced by someone visibly stressed, with shadows under his eyes and tension in his movements. "Thank you for seeing me, Arabella," he began, declining my offer to sit. "I'll keep this brief." "I appreciate that. What can I help you with?" Troy paced briefly before stopping to face me directly. "Our company is filing for bankruptcy. I thought you should hear it from me before it becomes public next week." Though not entirely surprised, I felt a moment of genuine sympathy. Business failure was painful regardless of the circumstances. "I'm sorry to hear that, Troy." "Are you?" He gave a bitter laugh. "It must be satisfying to watch us crash and burn while your company thrives." I shook my head. "That's not how I measure success. What happened with our marriage was painful enough. I've never wished additional suffering on either of you." Troy studied my face, perhaps searching for insincerity and finding none. "Well, anyway, the investors pulled out last month. We couldn't secure additional funding with our sales numbers. The bank is calling in our business loan." I nodded, understanding the cascade of financial pressures that led to such outcomes. "What will you do next?" "That's partly why I'm here." Troy finally sat down, his posture less defensive. "Before everything happened between us, you always said I had good marketing instincts. I'm exploring options, and I wondered if you'd be willing to serve as a professional reference." The request was unexpected, After everything that had transpired, Troy was asking for my endorsement. That would depend on where you're applying, I said carefully. Anderson and Powell, the marketing director position. A good firm, I acknowledged. Is Paige also looking for new opportunities? Troy's expression clouded. Paige and I are taking some time apart. The business failure has been hard on our relationship. I absorbed this information without comment. Their marriage, built on the ruins of mine, was now experiencing its own structural failures. The bankruptcy has financial implications for both of us, Troy continued. Paige invested most of her savings in the company. I took out personal loans to keep us afloat. It's been difficult. I understand, I said simply, because I did. Financial pressure could reveal fundamental cracks in any relationship. The difference was that Troy and Paige had created those pressures through choices that harmed others, while my challenges had come from building something authentic. So about that reference, Troy prompted. I considered my response carefully. I can speak to your marketing capabilities from our time together. I'll be factual and professional. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. That's more than I had any right to expect. As he prepared to leave, Troy paused at the door. Your success. It's impressive, Arabella. Truly. I should have seen your potential when we were together. Perhaps, I agreed. But if you had supported my ambitions then, we might still be married, and you would have benefited from this success, rather than competing with it. The realization visibly hit him, color draining from his face as he finally understood the full magnitude of what his betrayal had cost him. In pursuing Paige and undermining me, he had not only lost a faithful wife, but also the business partnership that could have secured his future. I made a terrible mistake, he said quietly. You made several, I corrected, my tone matter, of fact rather than accusatory. But that's in the past now. I wish you luck with Anderson and Powell. After Troy left, I stood at my office window watching the city below. There was no vindictive satisfaction in his downfall, only a peaceful recognition that justice sometimes arrives through natural consequences rather than deliberate revenge. 2 weeks later, I provided the promised reference, honest about Troy's professional strengths, without mentioning our personal history. He secured the position at Anderson and Powell, and I heard through mutual connections that he and Paige had officially separated. My own life continued to expand in positive directions. I developed a mentorship program for women entrepreneurs, sharing the lessons from my journey while helping others navigate their own paths to success. I dated occasionally, but felt no rush to enter another serious relationship. The independence I had discovered was too valuable to compromise. During a charity gala the following spring, I encountered Paige unexpectedly. She had returned to interior design, working for a firm that specialized in commercial spaces. Our eyes met across the room, and after a moment's hesitation, she approached my table. Arabella, she said, her voice subdued. You look wonderful. Thank you, Paige. How are you? She glanced around at my companions, clearly uncomfortable with the audience. Could we speak privately for a moment? I excused myself and followed her to a quiet corner of the venue. I owe you an apology, she began, her words rehearsed but sincere. What we did was unforgivable. I betrayed your friendship and tried to steal your professional ideas. I've had a lot of time to reflect on who I became in that relationship, and I don't like that person. I studied her face, seeing genuine regret alongside the lingering embarrassment of someone whose calculated plans had backfired spectacularly. I appreciate your apology, Paige. It can't undo what happened, but it matters that you recognize the harm. I don't expect forgiveness or friendship, she continued. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was. Your success is entirely deserved. Thank you, I said simply. I hope you find your way forward. We parted with a civil nod, the conversation offering a kind of closure neither the divorce nor Troy's bankruptcy had fully provided. Some relationships couldn't be repaired, but the acknowledgement of harm could still heal something within ourselves. Later that evening, driving home to the house I had purchased with my own success, I reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. The pain of betrayal had been real and devastating. The end of my marriage had forced me to rebuild not just my life, but my understanding of myself. Yet from that painful soil had grown something unexpected, a stronger, more authentic version of who I had always been. The woman who had hidden her ambitions to keep peace in her marriage now stood confidently in boardrooms and at award podiums. The entrepreneur who had worked secretly from a spare bedroom now led a company recognized throughout the industry. The greatest lesson wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about the power of believing in yourself when others don't, about building success on your own terms, rather than seeking validation from those who undervalue you. Sometimes, the most painful endings create space for the most meaningful beginnings. Sometimes, losing what you thought you wanted leads you directly to what you actually need. And sometimes, the person who emerges from betrayal is stronger, wiser, and more authentic than the person who entered it. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights, grateful not just for my professional success, but for the journey that had revealed my true capacity for resilience, creativity, and growth. The best revenge wasn't Troy's bankruptcy or Paige's regrets. It was the full, authentic life I had created for myself, a life that would have remained undiscovered if they hadn't forced me to start again. Thank you for listening to my story. Have you ever experienced a betrayal that ultimately led to something better in your life? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their painful ending could become a beautiful beginning. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by those who fail to see it. It's revealed when you have the courage to see it yourself.